Hey, it's 9:40 here in St. Louis, and through the magic of radio via Skype, we're going to travel out to California, Northern California, and check in with a good friend of the show. He's a syndicated radio talk show host all around the country, and he's written a brand new book called Liars and Whores: How Big Government and Big Business Are Working to Save Their Own Assets, Not Yours. Ethan Bierman, welcome to Big 550 KTRS.
Well, McGraw, it is great to talk to you this fine rainy morning.
Yes, and we should say that you have friends and family in Southern Illinois.
Yes, absolutely. So good morning to them as well, and friends in the St. Louis area.
All right, good. Tell us about Liars and Whores. What was the premise of the book when you wrote it?
Well, it's a story about my journey, essentially, as my life. There are a lot of personal stories, and it talks about how I come to where I am today and how I think about the issues of the day, and I support it with a lot of data because one of the big issues that I think is really failing, and actually where radio fits very perfectly in today's conversation, is your Facebook news feed is full of headlines and people jumping to conclusions based on those headlines. So we need to read past those, because if we don't, we so easily get manipulated, and the money in politics that it's wielded by big business and it's loved by politicians because they're always running for re-election. We are the ones that are responsible, and it takes just a tiny bit of work, but people like you, McGraw, are doing that yeoman's work to help lead us to more knowledge.
Well, everyone talks about, change. Change is good. Hope and change. We got to change things. The country's often, every 4 years, the country's on the wrong path. So I'm 48 years old, and there hasn't been one election where we were actually on the right path. But we've gotten, Ethan, to a point where we're so good at keeping the status quo. However, whoever benefits from the status quo has perfected the ability to create public perception to keep the status quo.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question. I actually use the term the broken duopoly. And it's this false narrative. We live in a three-dimensional world, and everybody wants to say liberal versus conservative, Democrat versus Republican. It's a three-dimensional world, so why do we box ourselves in that way? Well, we allow it, and exactly to your point, there are people that make a lot of money by maintaining that status quo. I mean, we just heard the numbers now, depending on who you're asking. The presidential race in 2016, it's going to cost between $5 and $10 billion. The only people that are benefiting from that are those interested in the status quo, campaign consultants, and of course, we love the advertisers on radio.
Well, of course we do. But it goes back to, remember when President Bush would say, I don't do what is popular, I do what is right. And I was talking to a couple of pollsters, and they said, that polls very well, so he keeps using that. And so I think that's why people rush to Donald Trump, not because they necessarily like what he says, but they like the fact that he's not beholden to anybody, and he'll take on anybody, even if it's something they agree with.
Yeah, I'm going to actually agree with that completely. And the reason why is we are so tired of seeing politicians, and actually Hillary Clinton exemplifies this. She's going to say whatever it takes, because that's where the polls are leading you. And I got to tell you, I lived in Minnesota. That's where I'm from originally. I talk about that in the book quite a bit. I voted for Jesse Ventura for governor. And the reason I did it is he didn't owe anybody a favor. So he was able to accomplish things as governor that no Democrat, no Republican was ever going to be able to do, because they all owed people favors.
But it's one thing to say, hey, hope and change. It's another thing, though, and Hillary, but Jeb and Walker and the rest of them all sort of toe that line and are all overly handled, right? That's a criticism of Mitt Romney. It was also the criticism of Al Gore, right? They were overly handled. And then when you talk to him outside of the campaign, you're like, wow, that's a really nice guy. Where was that guy on the campaign? But your book, Liars and Whores, goes into some interesting things of change. And one of those things you talk about is the war on drugs. Everyone agrees it's a failure, and yet Washington and Colorado are kind of maligned for actually trying something different.
Yeah, and what's interesting is they're actually succeeding, and none of the horror stories have come true out of Colorado or Washington. Nothing has really changed on the ground other than new tax revenue. In Colorado, we're talking $50 million worth of tax revenue. I think I saw in Washington now it's $80 million in tax revenue. Yeah, I mean, this is just a prime example where legislating morality has never worked throughout human history. I talk about in the book, look, I'm Jewish, right? And Jews have really kind of gotten rid of the taboo of alcohol by incorporating it. Now, you can say it's based on religion. So the religion says that you drink wine all the time. So kids are introduced to it early on. It's not a taboo. You don't have alcoholism in the Jewish community. It's less than 1%. And because we don't agree, meth is absolutely the worst thing on earth, and I hope that never gets legalized. So we need to take the attention off of things like marijuana, which study after study shows actual medical benefits, and we need to be able to study that more. There was news out of Israel that they're using cannabis to actually kill specific types of cancer now. And we haven't taken advantage of that because of our reefer madness. So $1 trillion down the drain now over the last 40 plus years, essentially no change in drug use rates. And that is the definition of insanity. We keep doing it year after year. We expect different results and we never get it. So let's start with something simple like cannabis, which again, you can arguably say it's no worse than alcohol. We kill 10,000 people a year with drunk drivers. And people are getting in fights and everything else. So let's start there and take a different approach.
Ethan Bierman, our guest. He's a syndicated talk show host out of California, Northern California, the San Francisco, Oakland area. His new book is called Liars and Whores: How Big Government and Big Business Are Working to Save Their Own Assets, Not Yours. Ethan, how can we get the book?
Well, it's all over any of your favorite online retailers. Amazon, of course, carries the ebook version. It's paperback. You can go to Barnes & Noble. You can also go to my website, Liars and Whores, and it provides you with convenient links. And I do have an audiobook version coming shortly.
Okay, lastly, before we let you go, I quote you often in the first conversation we ever had. We met at a Talkers Convention a couple years ago, and you told me that you have done away and cut the cord, and you haven't had cable in your house in years, and you noticed something very strange when your young child went to go see a friend at a friend's house. What happened?
Oh, that was his first exposure to marketing, to a television ad. I'll never forget that because it was so extreme. That marketing is so effective, and I'm not against marketing, but we need to protect our kids from it. And it was so effective, he came home and he immediately was talking about the ad on a repeated basis. So my wife does a tremendous job, better than I do, of course, at this, to protect him from those powerful marketing messages that pervade our minds.
But he came back and you were like, why does he want this thing? He didn't want it 2 days ago. Why does all of a sudden he want this stupid toy? And you realized he was watching cable at his friend's house.
That's exactly what it was. So yeah, and it's just powerful though. I mean, it happens to all of us. We all get caught up in that, and marketing is successful. And you and I succumb to it too, McGraw, except we call it something else. We call it keeping up with the Joneses, right, or wanting the latest gadget.
But you're paying $100, $150 a month for cable so that your kids can whine and complain about all the things they don't have.
That's exactly right. And then you wonder why you're broke at the end of the month and you need a subsidy there to help you with your grocery bill, right? Because you're out buying junk you don't need. It doesn't help us. I get into free trade in the book as well. And then you're buying the trinkets at your favorite large big box store, and you wonder why you throw that trinket away 2 weeks later because your kid is no longer interested. That doesn't help our country or our planet either.
Liars and Whores. Find it bookstores anywhere. The website, Ethan, one more time?
Liarsandwhores.com.
Liarsandwhores.com. Ethan, be safe, and we'll talk to you soon.
McGraw, great to talk to you. Thank you.
You got it. 950 here, Big 550 KTRS. Ethan Bierman's a good guy, syndicated talk show host out of California. I've met him and talked to him at the Talkers Convention. It's good to stay in touch with the brethren in the business, and he's out with a new book, so we'll give him a little love.